what? Because I didn't want to have a fight about money as well as having a fight about our children
Mm.
and who was getting what. And it was if there was a tax implication that would have benefited him that I thought should have benefited me just because of how the numbers turned out, which is what this discrepancy that we're talking about is with alimony, it would have made things so much more complicated for us. But as it was, they're like, oh, well, it would be like this, and here are the tax benefits of either way. And it was just kind of a, here it is, you don't need to fight about it. And I feel like it would have been a fight otherwise.
Yeah, it's unclear to me exactly why this is being suggested by the GOP. I mean, a lot of this tax bill is really unclear. It seems like they weren't really paying attention to what they were doing. They wrote it all on napkins over lunch, and we don't know why they did what they did, and they don't seem to know why they did what they did. So I'm not sure how much of this is going to remain in the final bill, but I think it's troubling that these kind of broad changes are even being proposed without a clear rationale for them.
Mhm.
One side effect of it that makes me sort of cringe and want to barf a little bit is that it incentivizes you to stay married because a lot of why people stay is because they can't get out, in my opinion. I believe that Kevin would know this way more than me. That the reason why I was able to leave was because I had a job, like I had a career, so that I had my own money, so I had an income that was coming in, that it wasn't dependent on anyone else, and I also had a place to go. My parents are very local, and they're like, "Yes, move in with me." So I was able to like literally leave within 24 hours when I needed to like get out.
One of the biggest issues we deal with the what we call it safety planning when especially in the for the cases we deal with, and the most difficult thing to find is stable housing for you and your kids, which especially if you're the partner who stayed home and took care of the kids, you don't have access to your own money, or your partner demanded you hand over your paycheck, or it's a joint account and you both have continued access to it until you figure out what you're going to do. The first thing I do in a case is that petition for child support or maintenance, because no way, like, part of the reason, getting a little deeper into the social work side of it, I think the average number of attempts that a woman makes when leaving an abusive relationship is like 5 or 6. I forget the exact number, but part of the reason that cycle happens is after that separation, she can't make any of her bills. The partner's apologizing, promising to change, and it now becomes easier to go back when you can't financially stabilize yourself. That's a big one. Yeah, totally.
No, I think I think it would be interesting to talk about custody and child support since we are talking about the money aspect of this because a lot of my divorce was figuring out the money.
Okay, so let's move on and talk about custody. A number of states have legislation that they're putting in place, that they're proposing or they're starting to debate, that is going to assume a 50-50 parenting relationship absent evidence that it shouldn't be 50-50. And so this is a bit of a change in some cases in states where, it may have assumed that the mother was going to have primary custody, unless the father asked for. So, let's think through what those changes to the law would mean. And, there are certainly compelling arguments for why it should be that way, but it would be a major change. And so, what would that mean?
Well, I'll start with Illinois no longer calls it custody and visitation. It is now allocation of parental responsibilities and parenting time. The idea being that if we don't call it custody and it's not something you win or lose, it would hopefully make the fight less acrimonious. I think I've yet to see that pan out. So Illinois' law, and it's funny that you asked this question right now because there is a pending piece of legislation in the Illinois legislature about this presumed 50-50 split. The law as it stands, because we just did a decade-long overhaul of our divorce statute in Illinois. January 1st, 2016, changes to the Divorce Act that were in the works for literally 10 years, being debated and fine-tuned, went into effect. And what the law says right now is that the maximum involvement of both parents is presumed to be in the child's best interests. From a practitioner's standpoint, what I find this idea of 50-50 split to be much more aspirational than real. And I can tell you that I'm not aware of any state that still has on the books in any way any kind of explicit presumption to the mother. That I think those mostly evaporated in the 70s and very early 80s. I think to the extent you see any continued imbalance in custody or parenting time awards to mothers, it's an artifact of the fact that mothers continue to provide the majority of childcare. Just from a very practical standpoint, this 50-50 split is a very difficult thing to do in practice. It requires both parents have, equally flexible work schedules. They both live in driving distance of the same school district. I just think it's one of those things we say because it sounds good without understanding that, every family is different. Every family divides labor differently. And it's not like those are actually quantifiable. You don't really say, well, I changed a diaper and that's worth 2 feedings and that's worth 1 trip to the doctor. It's not a point system. So I find this, I just find a lot of people who don't do divorce law seem to understand, oh, 50-50 would be great. Isn't that great? Without understanding that if there was a reason it wasn't 50-50 before the parties separated, a court can't just order them do it 50-50 now, because I just don't see that happening.
I agree with that. And I come at this from the perspective of living in Minnesota, where it is assumed that it will be 50-50 between the parents. And in my particular case, it's worked out that way. And I have no idea how it's possible that it's working out for my ex-husband and I that we literally do 50-50. Because our lives are chaotic, and the way it works, the reason why it works for us is due in large part that my ex-husband has OCD, and so he thrives on a schedule. And so for me, I was like, that's actually quite convenient. So shortly after we separated, and there was this horrible couple of weeks where we didn't have a schedule, and so we were kind of sending our then 2-year-old back and forth between houses, and it was just horrible and awkward. And then I looked at a calendar and I said, if it was going to be 50-50, because by that point I had Googled a lot about how custody should work, and I use little air quotes with should, and I figured out a 2-week rotating schedule that I was like, well, this would accommodate his tennis league that I know always happens on Tuesdays, and I like to have my knitting group on Mondays, so then maybe I'll do that. Like, that was the level of things I was thinking of. And that 2-week exactly 50-50 schedule is still in effect today. I don't think that would be possible if I didn't have a co-parenting partner who did his entire life by a schedule. My life didn't normally work that way beforehand, but now it's adjusted to because it's best for the kids. But an interesting thing that's happened as I've slowly re-entered the dating scene is that I'm meeting a lot of people who are also divorced and they also have kids. So one of the first conversations we have is, what's your custody schedule? Oh, you guys, it is all over the place. Like, even if on paper in Minnesota it says 50-50, they're like, well, that's what it says. But actually, this year it's kind of worked out more 60-40. But then next year, I think it's probably going to be like, I'll have him 70 and he'll have 30. And like, our lives aren't scheduled. And it's so weird to me that in Minnesota, the law is defaulting. And it's like, well, of course it'll be 50-50. Why wouldn't it be? I'm like, well, see Exhibit A, reality?
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, most of the clients I deal with where, one party works, the other party stayed at home or worked part-time to do childcare, it's just not realistic to expect that both parents will be equally able to get the kids to school in the morning. Like, there was a reason that devolved on one parent during the relationship. It's just, I just think it's one of those things that sounds great on paper. It would also be nice if parties got along, but you can't order that either. It's just, and particularly for the cases that I see, the 50-50 split of time, like one of the ways an abuser continues to abuse their victim is to use the access to their lives that they have because of shared children. So if there have to be, if there are constant visitation exchanges, that's another opportunity to see the person who hurt them and for them to quiz them. Who are you dating and why were you here then? And like all of the harassing, abusive behavior that partner exhibited during the relationship, because of the access that child sort of allows for, the abuser continues to use that. So when I look at this presumed 50-50 statute, I just cringe on the inside because I know that the clients I deal with, their partners are going to use that under the guise of it saying, well, I'm a good parent too, is really, no, you just want to be able to keep harassing your former partner. Um,
I wish that there was a companion piece to the default of 50/50 that was a clearer definition that also matched reality of what a good parent was, because that it felt really fuzzy. In my particular case, there was a brief bit where I was asking for 100% custody for some very specific reasons, and it looked like for about a week there I was going to get it, and it would, but the level that it had to get to was really, really bad. And I assumed things like, hypothetically, rotting food in the fridge and a house that hadn't been cleaned since I moved out, that those would be deal breakers. And so I took some pictures of my house, and the lawyer said, well, but he could clean that in an afternoon. That's not enough to go on. And I'm like, what? I assumed that it would be. It's like my personal definition of what was safe didn't match.
yeah,
Yeah.
I I think the reality, and I see this a lot with my clients, like for better, I don't think I'm going to shock anyone in the conversation by suggesting our society generally holds mothers to a different standard than fathers, and I think their expectation of what a good parent or a competent parent is different. And more importantly, the law, like, and again, I'm only speaking for my state, and I say it this way to my clients sometimes, the law does not entitle you to a good parent. It simply protects you from a sufficiently bad parent. A dirty refrigerator and an unkept house would not get any judge's attention, I think, in my practice area. It would have to be something way worse. And then they would be given several chances to remedy it. And only after like the fourth or fifth time of it happening would that really start to create traction. So I don't know how Minnesota does it, but at least in Illinois, the kind of the parenting time and decision making are two sort of obviously related, but not the same thing. Like to say you have 100% custody in Illinois would just mean you're the one making big decisions like education or healthcare, but that's separate from what the parenting time schedule would be. So does Minnesota kind of bundle those together a little bit more?
They're separate as well, because there was legal custody, not legal custody, like legal decision making. I'm using the wrong terms here. And then there was like physical
Okay,
custody.
and that's actually like a big thing that I experience with my clients too. Is most of the time the kids are obviously going to go to a public school. Both parties were the same religion. Like a lot of those big decisions were kind of agreed on. So a court kind of defaults to, well, why not? Why don't you just make these decisions together because you seem to agree? Sometimes there's a reason you want to have that decision making to yourself because you know how your partner behaves when you do disagree or when they don't get their way. It's gotten better over the years. I think over the time I've been practicing, which is about 10, 11 years now, I think if there is a documented history of domestic violence, judges are at least a little more inclined to entertain why joint custody or joint decision making is a bad idea. But I think very much alive and well is this presumption that all parents walking in the room are, what's the word I'm looking for, like co-equal, or because they're asking for it, they must deserve it.
It also breaks my brain a little bit that we have a 7-day week and there could be anything resembling 50-50 split of time.
Yeah, I was
Yes.
too. I'm sitting there because I also have OCD, so I'm sitting there trying to like split it up exactly, and I'm like, how does that work?
That's why I have it on a 2-week rotating schedule. So, for an example, to help unbreak your brain, hopefully, right now, because I have two very small children, I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. And so at this point, like, there's no way that we could go to like 1 week at their dad's house and 1 week at my house because they're so little. Like, they miss us. And so what we have is I have them every Tuesday and Thursday night, and he has them every Monday and Wednesday night. And then we alternate Friday through Sunday. So that means that every other weekend, like I have them Thursday through Sunday, and then I drop them off at preschool and daycare on Monday morning, and then they're the responsibility of their dads, and then it just kind of flips back and forth. I have some friends who also have 50/50 custody, where they do 3 days at one parent's house, 2 days at the other parent's house, and then 2 days back, and then 3-2-2, 3-2-2, which I've heard is very common. I don't particularly know that. and that seems to work okay. But then, like, I look at an actual calendar, and then my brain breaks too.